Hi, I'm Emily Glover, and today I will be talking about the stigma around mental health. Think of the last day you were really sad. Not just sad for a moment, but a full day of sadness, yet you had to continue about your daily life. Wasn't that exhausting? Now, think of the last time you were so stressed you couldn't sit still. The tiniest inconvenience could cause you to crack, yet you had to continue about your daily life. Wasn't that exhausting? This is what the average day looks like for someone who struggles with the mental illnesses of depression and anxiety. Often, they go through most days pretending they aren't constantly plagued by these ongoing battles because they don't want to be judged or ridiculed for their conditions. Unfortunately, our society degrades these emotions into fleeting emotions that don't matter, making those who wrestle with these feel weak and incompetent. This mindset creates a stigma, and it is toxic. People who suffer from the mental illnesses of depression and anxiety often feel trapped in their conditions because of the harmful stigmas others carry. Without a change in attitudes towards these conditions, society will continue to suffer, and this widespread phenomenon will increase, leading to more suicides and more people living in a hopeless isolation. The stigma must decrease so healing can increase. In order to fully address the subject at hand, I will first define depression, anxiety, and stigma. Then, I will explain how the stigma impacts the mental health of those who suffer. Next, I will explore the impact of relationships and social media on mental health. And finally, I will unpack how Scripture addresses this and how that it can bring about healing. So first, we must address the fact that words float around society very carelessly. And these words, when they're used without understanding, create the stigma. In order to stop this, we must understand the serious nature of these illnesses. Sandy Mann, a well-known psychologist who has published over 20 psychology-related books, says that anxiety can sometimes look like being generally anxious without there necessarily being a specific cause or situation that is causing the anxiety. However, it can also occur as panic attacks, which are a sudden rush of fear that peaks very quickly and is accompanied by a range of quite debilitating physical and emotional symptoms. Everyone who experiences anxiety feels its effects differently, and these symptoms can often fluctuate throughout various seasons of life. And although anxiety and depression can make the other worse and they have very distinct symptoms, it is very common for an individual to be diagnosed with both. Sandy Mann also speaks about the depths of depression. She says that depression is more than just sadness. People with depression may experience a lack of interest and pleasure in daily activities, significant weight loss or gain, insomnia or excessive sleeping, lack of energy, inability to concentrate, feelings of worthlessness or excessive guilt, and recurrent thoughts of death and suicide. These symptoms are not the result of weakness. These individuals experience a loss of belonging that leaves them alone in this world while persevering through trying battles. Tragically, many people experience these symptoms early in life. Diane Egbers, a mother who lost her son to suicide and founded a nonprofit to create better systems for struggling teens, says that 50% of the onset of mental illness happens between the ages of 10 to 14. And for this age group, it is the number 1 cause of death and the number 2 for ages 15 to 24. These mental illnesses are so common that they affect 1 in 5, or 20% of adults in the United States. So virtually everybody knows somebody struggling with mental health issues. These conditions are so common, yet so many people refuse to accept them. This phenomenon will not stop until conversations start and acceptance begins. So now let's address the masses of people that believe that no stigma exists. Yet despite this belief, there are still rampant suicide rates, and the people that silently suffer continue to increase. A documentary entitled Out of Sight, Stop the Stigma and Start a Conversation that focuses on the unhealthy stigma around mental health says that this year, 1 in 12 high school students will attempt to end their lives. 1 in 12. Chances are, you probably know one of those 12. One could be a friend, sibling, classmate, coworker, child. And you probably wouldn't know until it is too late. People are suffering. A change must be made. The suicide rates will not decrease until people begin to feel accepted when they can reach out for help. However, since the stigma persists, people feel trapped, judged, and isolated. Brandon Marshall, a previous wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, who actively speaks out about mental health, says that 30% of those suffering will choose not to seek help because they are concerned about confidentiality and the negative perception of others. People continue to feel trapped by this stigma that exists because people do not understand what they face, assuming it stems from weakness or a negative mindset. Education about these illnesses are crucial to ending the judgment and letting love heal what is broken. So next, we must evaluate the essential elements of a stigma, because without understanding, no change can be made and people will continue to suffer. The best way to make a change is to understand the basics. So, what is stigma? Stigma is a mark or sign of disgrace or discredit. It refers to the experience of being perceived negatively by or set apart from others due to stereotyping. Many people relate a physical illness to a mental illness. Imagine a person is sick with diabetes or cancer or a broken bone. Nobody would tell them to toughen up or keep it to themselves, yet these phrases are carelessly spewed at individuals who suffer from mental illness because according to society, these are personal issues and not real medical conditions. Similarly, Kate Fagan, author of What Made Maddie Run, recalls a conversation she had with a makeup artist. Being happy is a choice, she was told. Kate replied to this common phrase saying, "But I'm not so sure everyone can choose to be happy. Sometimes whatever is going on in their brains can't just be willed away." "But I just think you can't let the demons get to you." Right, but maybe your demons aren't as persistent as someone else's. Fagan makes a crucial point here. Maybe your demons aren't as persistent as someone else's. Everyone has demons and everyone has bad days. Everyone has trials in life. But not everyone experiences these dark times to the extent that those who suffer from mental illness do. So telling them to toughen up and create their own happiness creates a toxic and helpless environment for these people that desperately need support. The ability to define and identify these things are crucial to breaking this cultural phenomenon because without understanding, no change can be made and we will continue to suffer. So this lack of sympathy leaves people with an overwhelming guilt because of society's view of them. And with no end to this, they will continue to live in hopeless isolation. With this in mind, we must realize that depression can affect anyone. There are no prerequisites to depression. Many people assume that there's a cause or a root issue that causes these symptoms to appear, and while there can be triggering events, these issues can last well after someone has coped with them. No one understands that normal tasks for those who do not suffer from mental illness can be burdensome for those who do suffer. Simple tasks like brushing your teeth, showering, and making a meal can feel like an uphill battle. This fatigue that accompanies depression becomes discouraging. The extreme effort that it takes to function pushes people into isolation because they do not have the energy to complete these mundane tasks, let alone socialize. Yet some still claim depression is a choice. Would you want to wake up every morning and feel like you're forcing yourself to hold on just one more day? Feeling like there is nothing left to live for? Always being tired, never feeling motivated to do anything, never seeing or talking to anyone, and having body conscious issues and many other problems that accompany depression? I didn't think so. Instead of guilting these individuals for their lack of ability to function, we need to lay aside our prejudices and band together to help these people. Personally, as someone who has struggled with depression, I can tell you how meaningful it is when a friend just listens. They don't try to fix their problems, they just listen. They try their best to understand, and they never, ever guilt you for having these feelings or for needing help. This is what we must do. It is painfully obvious that these individuals who struggle do not choose this life for themselves. The pressure to continue life normally while struggling with these issues contributes to the suicide rates. And my friends, we cannot lose another sibling, child, or friend to an illness that can begin to be healed with love and acceptance. This is why we must disregard the lack of visible signs and understand a person when they express their feelings, instead of saying they seem fine. This creates the stigma and it must be stopped. In a poll I conducted on my Instagram page, I asked about people's experience with mental health and if they had been affected by the stigma. One teenage girl shared this response. My parents and friends all see my smile and don't believe there is anything wrong. This response is heartbreaking. In our highly stigmatized culture, people believe that they must see the illness. There must be something wrong. But how often do they stop to consider that many people who experience these dark times try to hide their symptoms? We must look beyond this outward appearance and listen to people when they express their feelings. If we begin to consistently do this simple task, the suicide rates will dramatically decrease. Grant Egbers, for example, was constantly misdiagnosed in his journey with mental illness. He experienced chronic pain and memory loss from 4 concussions. Yet his legacy lives on well after his choice to end his life. He was known as a boy who from a young age looked out for others. His smile and positivity never faltered. He reached out to everyone. He radiated love. No one could have guessed the demons he battled daily. Yet his life serves as just one example of how these demons can infest themselves deeply, not being revealed to the outside world until it is too late. So now that we have examined the various impacts of the stigma and mental health, we must understand the causes of these issues and the ways in which we can resolve them. In order to initiate change, we must begin to create meaningful relationships, because authentic relationships are a key component to a healthy mental state. Growing up in a home with overprotective or critical parenting can lead to a variety of mental health issues, since parents play such an essential role in the development of an adolescent. Overprotective parenting directly correlates to anxiety because the reduced opportunity for the child to approach new and potentially fearful situations has been decreased, leading to the inability of the child to cope with these unfamiliar situations. This lack of exposure leads to a heightened anxiety. Parents are not supposed to shelter their children from all harm, but instead walk beside and guide them through the trials of life. And while critical parenting and overprotective parenting sometimes overlap, it is much more common for critical parenting to be associated with underinvolved parents. Critical parenting occurs when a parent minimizes or criticizes a child's emotions, leading the child to feel as if their emotions or struggles are invalid. This practice of critical parenting has been consistently associated with depression and, to a lesser extent, anxiety. Overprotective parenting and critical parenting serve as a leeway for improper emotional and mental development. Many times, when children who grew up with these types of parents finally muster up the courage to ask for help in their struggles, they are met with opposition, denial, and blame. Parents must lead and guide their children, but ultimately, these kids need to feel loved and accepted when they reach out for help, especially when struggling with mental illness. Instead of reacting out of anger, I encourage you to work and do everything in your power to love and accept your child. But I beg you, do not respond with anger and blame. Diana Egbers urges people to understand the crucial role of parental involvement in the healing process. She proposes this as a partial solution to the difficulties that their children are facing. When her son was in therapy before his death, the treatment center that he was at was very adamant about giving feedback to your mom and dad about how they're contributing to the struggles you're having. So it is absolutely part of a family's culture, because when your kid is struggling, you as a parent want to fix it. You can help, support, and coach, but that individual has to develop the coping skills. They have to work their way back to overall health. Parents play such a crucial role in a child's well-being, and it can be difficult to hear in areas in which they feel that you have let them down. But you must respond with love, support, and acceptance. Furthermore, social media use can be a double-edged sword when it comes to those who struggle with mental health. It can be detrimental or beneficial, and we must consider both sides to see the impact it has on teens today. First, let's shine a light on the positive aspects of social media. In a study done by the American Association of Suicidology, they concluded that social media can be helpful for people who are suicidal and unable to reach out in person. I will be the first to agree that social media can seem fake and edited a lot of the time. However, these accounts that provide awareness and encouragement allow these individuals to feel connected. Accounts equip teens with hotlines, coping mechanisms, and other credible resources to aid those who might not have access to other support. Another positive aspect of social media is the ability to identify who is struggling and reach out to support them. This happens through vague booking. Vague booking refers to the social media posts that contain little actual and clear information but are worded in a way as to solicit attention and concern from the readers. Typically, this person vague-booking either wants attention, and this practice is toxic and should not be tolerated, or they truly feel trapped and isolated and need help. Hope Squad's a peer-based program in schools that seeks to provide help for those struggling with mental health, are trained to view these posts as a signal to reach out for help. In the Cincinnati area alone, many lives have been saved through this practice, and it will continue to be saved as more people are equipped to see the signs and act. However, even with these significant benefits, we must address the downside of social media, the effects of the unmonitored content on teens who struggle with mental health. Diane Egbers lost her son to suicide. She provides insight into the effects of social media, and while she agrees there can be positive aspects, she has been personally affected by its downfalls. She says that those struggling must be cautious on social media, because especially males, but females as well, when you're struggling with mental illness, you're 20 times more likely to take your life if you see a violent act on social media. And boys see a violent act on social media once every 10 minutes. Those who are really struggling with depression have a hard time separating their own sadness from the sadness they internalize from the world. And seeing these things pushes them to a point of desperation. Grant's story is a testimony to this. She says, "Our son saw a violent act, and 10 minutes later was in his room taking his own life." The effects of social media are real. They influence people, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. And we must be able to differentiate when these things are good and when they're bad, and discern when they become a hazard instead of a tool. Finally, we must address the fact that mental health awareness can sometimes degrade emotional issues into a temporary struggle. However, Scripture says that these are caused by the fall and require love and acceptance for the whole person as they seek healing. During the time that Christ walked this earth, he continuously loved everyone, even those that society viewed as outcasts, much like how those who struggle with mental health are outcasts in society today. In John chapter 4, when Christ was in Samaria, he met a woman at the well. He asked this woman for a drink of water. She was shocked that a Jew would ask for anything, since Jews tended to have a prejudice against Samaritans, and this woman in particular was living in a state of sexual sin. Yet did Christ turn his back on her? No. In fact, he offered her the living water of life. Within this passage, he looked past the social stigma surrounding this woman and loved her for who she is, a child of God. Christ did not discriminate, so why should we? With this in mind, in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 through 2, Paul calls us to be imitators of Christ, walking in love as God loved us. This means we must follow in Christ's footsteps, let go of our preconceived notions, and show the love that God offers to us, because we are all unique and beautiful to our Father in heaven. Additionally, we must understand that mental health is a result of the fall, but that does not mean it is a result of sin. When sin entered the world, we no longer lived in perfect harmony with God. We began to have to labor for food. We experienced pain, sickness, and death. Therefore, these illnesses are not a result of personal sin, but of a loss of this union with God. They are not a reason to disrespect and degrade a person because of our own judgments. So naturally, we seek healing for these illnesses here on earth. However, some people go their entire lives struggling with these illnesses. Why doesn't Christ provide this healing? Brad Hambrick, the pastor of counseling at a church in North Carolina, addresses this contention. He challenges the audience to reflect on these questions. How do we understand the tension between already and not yet with regards to health, development, and the preservation of minds? How much should we be able to expect to remedy the effects of the fall upon the mind prior to the ultimate redemption that will occur when Christ returns? Hambrick puts this conversation into perspective. Christ does not promise complete healing here on earth. However, we know in heaven we will be healed completely. We must understand where we stand in redemptive history and how that affects the promises of God. Even though he does not promise us this healing here on earth, he does dwell within each one of us and loves each one of us. He sets the perfect example of loving us despite anything we face, and we must follow in his footsteps. Following Christ's example is the only way we will break this cultural phenomenon. When it comes to the promoting of healing, there is no room for judgment or ridicule or anger. Meeting people with understanding, acceptance, and patience allows them to feel comforted on their journey for healing. So I ask you, who in your life is struggling? Who can you reach out to? Who can you love better? And if any of you out there are struggling, you are loved. There is hope. Don't give up.
Thank you, Emily. I have a few questions for you.
Yeah.
How do you think quarantine is affecting the mental health of individuals?
It's a really good question. So how is quarantine affecting the mental health of individuals? I think it's impacting it a lot. We are forced into this time of isolation, and something I didn't fully address in my speech, but social media gives us the appearance of being connected. However, it's deceptive because we're not fostering true connections. So when we're spending this much time on social media because we have nothing else to fill our time, we're being deceived into feeling connected. However, we still feel completely trapped and isolated, which can lead into these effects of bad dips in mental health and social media. I actually am still in therapy, and I was talking to my therapist about how many more therapy sessions they're getting because people are feeling these effects so real. So it's very important to find those ways in which we can find true connection with our family or social distancing meetups to really initiate that connection and help to keep our mental health out of the dark dips that we can experience.
Thank you. What do you think of the humorous take on mental health in the Gen Z culture, and how young teens are making jokes of serious topics like suicide and depression?
Yeah. So I think that in a way, I'm not saying these jokes are okay or helpful. However, in a way, they can reassure people that they're not experiencing these things alone, because I think our generation knows that when we joke about things, it tends to be pretty prevalent. So the jokes themselves do not help these individuals who feel isolated, but I think in a way they can open up the conversations. I think we need to begin to be aware of these jokes and make them lessen. However, if we do see them, we can use them as a conversation starter and a way to begin to provide healing. So while they're not good, they can be a launch pad for good.
Thank you. How does shame affect mental health? Is there a root of insecurity because of an identity in the success of sports, friends, and academics? Again, how does shame affect mental health? And is there a root connected to sports, friends, and academics?
Yes. Well, I haven't done a ton of research on this topic. I definitely think there is a deep connection to that. In our society, we are very result-oriented, and when we don't have those specific results, it can encourage a lack of good feelings, I guess. I think it is very important to differentiate the just dealing with life events and the sadness that life events give us and actual mental illnesses. Just sadness from different things that we experience is not mental illness. So I think that plays a part in it, but there is definitely a shame that comes from mental illness, and I think the shame that we feel from these events, if we aren't living up to standards that we feel like we have been put in place on us, they can affect our mental health if there's a pre-existing connection there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you think that parenting is the main reason kids develop mental illness?
No, that is a very hard topic. Parents do not impose mental illnesses on our children. Like I did address, the overprotective parenting can cause anxiety because they do not have the ability to cope with these situations. But parents themselves are not necessarily making these illnesses. There's also a lot of pre-existing conditions that can affect it. It is hereditary. There's so many variables, and it's not just one variable. I was only able to address the two of social media and parental relationships, but friendships, there are so many different factors in the development of mental illnesses, that no, you can't just cause one factor to say that that is what happened and caused the mental illness.
Thank you. Has mental health been a significant problem in past decades, or is it a very recent problem, and why?
I believe that it has been a pre-existing problem. I don't have any data or statistics to back this up, but I think we can all agree that there were cases of it. There's literature that talks about it, and while they might not have been diagnosed and it was very culturally unacceptable to talk about, it did exist. I think it is becoming a more prevalent and it's more widespread than it was in the past because of the different ways that our culture, especially social media, those things all play into mental health. So I think it was a problem. I think it is becoming a more rampant problem, but it's definitely more culturally acceptable to talk about now, which is why there's so much more of an emphasis on it.
Okay. Just two more questions.
Mm-hmm.
In what ways do you think our culture, which encourages independence from our parents at a young age, can get back to the belief in our parents as our mentors and steady support?
It's a really good question. I think there's a lot of different factors that play into that. Our parents are supposed to be our friends and our mentors, but often because of the pressures that we can feel that they have put on us, it becomes unhealthy. I think a lot of the independence that our society has given us with all the just different tasks that we come into, we're not as family focused as we were. I think a simple thing that we can begin to do that might help foster this is simply just stepping back and taking that family time, allowing you to really cultivate those relationships with your parents and getting to know them as, yes, mentors, yes, people that lead and guide you, but also as a friend.
Thank you. Last question.
Yeah.
Do you think parents should limit social media use based on the potential negative effects on teen mental health?
That's a good question. I think it's up to the parents' discernment. If they feel their child is spending too much time on social media, this could be a limit that they want to put in place. That could be a good idea. I don't really know the effects of social media on, I didn't study that too much on people who are not struggling with depression or anxiety. So I can't tell you how much of that would be helpful. I do know that those who are struggling with mental illness, it's very important to be careful on social media like we were talking about. I don't know, it's really up to the parents' discernment, how much their child is even spending time on social media, how much they feel it is beneficial, and how much they feel it is dangerous. There's a lot of, again, factors that go into it. I think it's very hard for this subject to give a black and white answer because there's just so many different variables that can go into this. Sometimes teens tend to feel more connected while on social media, and while that, like we said earlier, it can be deceptive, it can also cultivate really great friendships, but it also can be very harmful, like we discussed. So it's up to a lot of discernment, open communication between the parent and child about how they're feeling, what's going on, and how they feel it's affecting them.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.